Thousands of years ago, in an age when heroes walked the earth, a war erupted that would echo through eternity. The clash between Greeks and Trojans lasted 10 brutal years, becoming the foundation of Western literature itself. Was Troy real? Yes. Archaeological evidence shows that the ancient city once stood proudly on the western coast of modern-day Turkey. Over 3,000 years ago, within those legendary walls, a story unfolded that would captivate humanity forever. This is a tale of gods and warriors, of passionate love and devastating vengeance. The poet Homer immortalized these events in his Iliad and Odyssey, painting vivid portraits of golden-armored heroes and divine beings who shaped mortal fates with their whims. Before these stories were written, bards sang them by firelight, enchanting listeners with adventures both wondrous and terrible. Imagine a world where gods descended from Mount Olympus to walk among mortals, where honor meant more than life itself, and where a single stolen bride could launch 1,000 ships across the wine-dark sea. This was the world of the Trojan War. Our story begins not with war, but with celebration. The mortal king Peleus married Thetis, a beautiful sea nymph, in a union that brought all the Olympian gods together. Zeus himself attended, along with Hera, Poseidon, Apollo, and the other immortals. But one goddess received no invitation, Eris, the goddess of discord and strife. When she learned of her exclusion, bitter resentment consumed her heart. If she couldn't share in the celebration, she would ensure everyone remembered her presence. As the feast reached its height, a golden apple rolled across the banquet table, inscribed with 3 words, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses immediately rose: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom; and Aphrodite, goddess of beauty. Each believed the apple was meant for her. Zeus, too wise to make such a dangerous judgment himself, appointed a mortal judge, Paris, a shepherd prince tending flocks on Mount Ida. Unknown to Paris, he was actually the abandoned son of King Priam of Troy, exposed on the mountainside as an infant after his mother dreamed he would bring destruction to the city. Hermes led the 3 rival goddesses to Mount Ida, where Paris watched his sheep. Each offered him an extraordinary bribe. Hera promised, "Choose me, and I'll make you the most powerful king in the world." Athena offered, "Choose me, and I'll make you the wisest warrior, victorious in every battle." But Aphrodite whispered, "What good is power or glory if your nights are lonely? Choose me, Paris, and I'll give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta will be yours." Paris, young and ruled by passion rather than wisdom, barely hesitated. He handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, naming her the fairest. In that single moment, on a quiet mountainside far from civilization, the first stone in an avalanche of war was set loose. Hera and Athena departed in fury, their wounded pride festering into hatred for Paris and his home city of Troy. Aphrodite reminded Paris of her promise. Helen would be his, despite the fact she was already married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Soon after the judgment, Paris's true identity was discovered. He returned to Troy and was joyfully welcomed by King Priam, who had long regretted abandoning his son. When Paris announced his intention to visit the Greek kingdoms, his father gladly provided ships and an escort. But Paris had only one destination in mind, Sparta, where the legendary Helen lived as queen. Helen's beauty had drawn suitors from every corner of Greece. Before her marriage to Menelaus, wise Odysseus had suggested that all suitors swear an oath to support Helen's chosen husband and defend her marriage against anyone who would break it. This oath would soon be invoked with devastating consequences. In Sparta, King Menelaus received the Trojan prince with generous hospitality, unaware of Paris's designs on his wife. When Menelaus was called away to Crete for his grandfather's funeral, Paris seized his opportunity. Under cover of darkness, Paris and Helen boarded a Trojan ship, taking with them a considerable portion of Menelaus's treasure. Whether Helen went willingly out of love, was enchanted by Aphrodite's magic, or was taken by force, remains one of history's great debates. By the time Menelaus returned to find his wife and wealth gone, the Trojan ships were already crossing the sea toward Asia Minor. The king's rage shook his palace to its foundations. This wasn't merely personal betrayal. It was an insult to Greek honor. Menelaus immediately sent messengers to his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, reminding all former suitors of their sacred oath. The time had come to defend Helen's marriage and punish those who had violated it. The kings of Greece would go to war, and Troy would be their target. Ships from every corner of Greece converged on the harbour at Aulis, creating a forest of masts where once there had been only open water. Thousands of men made camp. Kings and princes, nobles and common soldiers all gathered under the banner of vengeance. The greatest military force the ancient world had ever seen was assembling. Agamemnon, king of wealthy Mycenae and brother to the wronged Menelaus, commanded the expedition. Not all the kings came willingly. Some were bound only by their oath. Odysseus, the clever ruler of rocky Ithaca, had feigned madness when Agamemnon's messengers arrived, yoking an ox and horse together to plough his fields and sowing salt instead of seed. But Palamedes placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus in the plough's path. Odysseus swerved to save his child, proving his sanity and revealing his deception. Bound by his oath, he had no choice but to join. The greatest challenge was finding Achilles, the young warrior whom prophecy named as essential to Greek victory. Son of King Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, Achilles was said to be nearly invincible. But his mother, knowing war meant death, had hidden him on the island of Skyros, disguised as a girl. Odysseus devised a plan to reveal him, bringing gifts for the king's daughters, fine fabrics and jewels, but also a magnificent sword and shield. While the girls admired pretty trinkets, one reached instinctively for the weapons, revealing warrior instincts no disguise could hide. Achilles' identity uncovered, he too joined the gathering forces, bringing his loyal friend Patroclus and his elite warriors, the Myrmidons. Despite this massive force, the fleet remained trapped in harbour, unable to sail. For weeks, no wind blew. The water lay flat as polished bronze, and the great ship sat motionless at anchor. Discontent spread through the camp. Some whispered that the gods themselves opposed the expedition. Desperate for answers, Agamemnon turned to the seer Calchas. The prophet's face was grave. "Artemis, goddess of the hunt, holds back the winds. She demands a sacrifice for an offense against her sacred deer, the life of Iphigenia, your eldest daughter." Agamemnon initially raged against this prophecy, but as days passed with no change and other kings spoke of returning home, his resolve weakened. He sent word to his wife Clytemnestra in Mycenae, bring Iphigenia not for sacrifice, but supposedly for marriage to Achilles. It was a cruel deception that would later bear terrible consequences. When mother and daughter arrived, what happened next varies by account. Some say Iphigenia discovered the truth and willingly offered herself for Greek victory. Others tell that she was taken by force to the altar, crying and pleading for her life. A third tradition holds that at the final moment Artemis intervened, replacing Iphigenia with a deer and spiriting the girl away to serve as a priestess. Whatever the truth, after the ceremony was completed, the winds began to blow. The sails of 1,200 ships filled at last. The prophet Calchas declared the goddess appeased, and Agamemnon gave the order to depart. The greatest armada the world had ever seen moved out of the bay at Aulis. Ship after ship passed between the headlands, their painted prows cutting through waves, their decks crowded with armed men gazing toward the horizon. They left behind a grieving mother, Clytemnestra, whose heart now burned with hatred for her husband, a hatred that would one day claim Agamemnon's life. But that reckoning lay in the future. For now, the Greek fleet sailed east with favorable wind at their backs. Each night they would beach on an island to rest and take on fresh water. Each morning they would set out again, drawing ever closer to Troy's shores. The journey wasn't direct. Some islands refused to provide supplies, some from trade ties with Troy, others from fear of Trojan reprisals. The war's first blood was shed not beneath Troy's walls, but on these scattered islands as the Greeks took by force what wasn't freely given. Achilles distinguished himself in these early conflicts. On the island of Tenedos, when local forces ambushed the Greeks as they came ashore, the young warrior led a counterattack that routed the defenders and captured their settlement. Here he won as his prize the maiden Briseis, a fateful acquisition that would later trigger his withdrawal from the war. As the fleet neared Trojan waters, an important question arose: where to land? Troy's immediate coastline offered few suitable beaches for such a massive force. Nestor, the oldest and wisest king, advised caution. A smaller advance force was sent first to secure a landing place. When the beach was secured, the full Greek armada approached, an awesome sight that caused even the bravest Trojan scouts to retreat toward their city's safety. As thousands of Greek soldiers established their camp on the Trojan plain, Odysseus prepared for a diplomatic mission. With Menelaus at his side and carrying olive branches as symbols of peaceful intent, he approached Troy's mighty gates. The Trojans, impressed by this gesture, opened their gates and escorted the Greek embassy to Priam's palace. In the great hall before the assembled court, Odysseus spoke with renowned eloquence. "King Priam, noble princes of Troy, we come before you not seeking war, though as you have seen, we are prepared for it. We seek justice for a grave wrong. Your son Paris has taken what is not his, the wife of King Menelaus and the treasure of Sparta. Return Helen and these stolen goods, make fair reparation for this breach of sacred hospitality, and we will depart in peace, leaving Troy unharmed." Menelaus then stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I speak not as a king now, but as a husband. Return my wife to me. Whatever passed between her and Paris, I am willing to forgive if she returns willingly. Troy need not suffer for one man's actions." King Priam, torn between love for his recently restored son and his sense of justice, looked to Paris. The young prince sat with Helen at his side, his hand possessively covering hers. Paris declared, "Helen is my wife now by her own choice and by Aphrodite's blessing. What kind of husband would I be if I surrendered her to another man? What kind of Trojan would surrender what he loves because of Greek threats?" The embassy ended in failure. Odysseus and Menelaus returned to their waiting ships with nothing but Troy's refusal. Dawn broke over the plain of Troy, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The bronze tips of Greek spears caught the early light as the army formed its battle lines. Across the field, Troy's gates swung open, and Trojan forces marched out to meet their foes. The Trojan War's first major battle was about to begin. For 9 long years, this scene would repeat with variations, an endless cycle of advances and retreats, small victories and defeats. Neither side could gain decisive advantage. The Greeks, despite their numbers, couldn't breach Troy's mighty walls. The Trojans, despite occasional successes in the field, couldn't drive the invaders back into the sea. During these early years, the war spread beyond Troy's plain. Realizing a direct assault on the city might prove impossible, Achilles led raids against Troy's allies and supply lines. With his Myrmidons, elite warriors who followed him with unwavering loyalty, he attacked 12 cities by sea and 11 by land. Each fell before his fury, adding to his legend. Meanwhile, Odysseus and Diomedes led scouting missions and ambushes, using cunning where strength alone might fail. The Trojans weren't passive. Hector, Troy's greatest warrior and Paris's elder brother, led bold sorties against the Greek camp. With his distinctive helmet topped with a horsehair plume, he was a rallying point for Trojan forces and a figure of dread for Greek soldiers. Unlike Paris, whose interests lay in palace pleasures rather than battlefield hardships, Hector embodied the ideal of Trojan nobility, devoted husband to Andromache, loving father to his son Astyanax, and tireless defender of his city. The gods themselves took sides in this mortal conflict. Apollo, the archer god, favored Troy, as did Aphrodite, who had started the war with her promise to Paris, and Ares, who delighted in bloodshed. The Greeks found supporters in Hera and Athena, still bitter about Paris's judgment, and Poseidon, who held an ancient grudge against Troy for a slight by a previous king. Zeus, father of gods and men, tried to remain neutral, though his sympathies often seemed to lean toward the Trojans. Divine intervention manifested in various ways. Sometimes a god would deflect an arrow meant for a favored hero or strengthen a warrior's arm at a crucial moment. Other times, immortals took more active roles, appearing on the battlefield in disguise to turn the tide of battle. When Aphrodite saw Paris losing his duel with Menelaus, she wrapped her protégé in mist and spirited him to safety, an inglorious rescue that did nothing for the prince's reputation. In the Greek camp, life settled into routines over the years. Kings still met in Agamemnon's tent to discuss strategy, though increasingly these councils dissolved into arguments as frustration grew. Common soldiers built more permanent structures. Accepting this would be no quick campaign. They fished, hunted in nearby hills, and held competitions during lulls in fighting to maintain their combat edge. Inside Troy, conditions gradually deteriorated as the siege continued. While the city's massive grain stores prevented starvation, fresh meat and produce became increasingly rare luxuries. The constant state of alert wore on civilians and soldiers alike. Children who were infants when the war began were now old enough to train with wooden swords. In the 8th year, during a successful raid on a town allied with Troy, the Greeks captured 2 noble women, Chryseis, daughter of Chryses, a priest of Apollo, and Briseis. Agamemnon claimed Chryseis as his prize, but soon a plague struck the Greek camp. The seer Calchas revealed the cause. Apollo was punishing them for the priest's daughter's enslavement. Reluctantly, Agamemnon agreed to return Chryseis to end the plague. But the High King's pride demanded compensation. "If I must lose my prize," he declared before the assembled Greek leaders, "I will take another's in her place." His eyes fell on Achilles, whose fame and independence had long irritated him. "I will take Briseis, your captive, to replace the woman I have lost." Achilles' hand flew to his sword. "You coward!" he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You lead from the rear, while better men bleed for your cause. And now you would steal what I earned with my own hands." Or only Athena's intervention, visible to Achilles alone, prevented him from striking the High King then and there. Instead, Greece's greatest warrior made a fateful decision. "Take her," he finally said, his voice cold as winter. "But know this, my men and I will no longer fight in your war. Let's see how you fare against Hector without Achilles." True to his word, Achilles withdrew to his tent and ships, taking his myrmidons with him. For days he sat brooding on the shore, watching as the battle's tide turned against the Greeks without Achilles' strength to tip the scales. Smoke darkened the sky above the Greek camp as more ships caught fire. Trojan warriors swarmed forward, emboldened by Hector's leadership and Achilles' conspicuous absence from the battlefield. The Greeks fought with desperate courage, but they were inexorably pushed back toward the sea that had brought them to these hostile shores. In his black-hulled ship at the camp's edge, Achilles watched the battle unfold with stony indifference. As the situation grew dire, Agamemnon finally acknowledged his error. He sent an embassy to Achilles' tent, Odysseus, Ajax, and old mentor Phoenix, bearing gifts and promises of reconciliation. Agamemnon offered to return Briseis untouched, along with 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, 20 bronze cauldrons, 12 horses, 7 women skilled in crafts, and if Troy fell, 20 Trojan captives of Achilles' choosing. He even offered one of his daughters in marriage with 7 prosperous towns as dowry. Odysseus presented these offers with his famous eloquence, appealing to Achilles' sense of compassion for his suffering comrades. Ajax, more blunt, reminded him of the bonds of friendship. Old Phoenix told a parable about the dangers of unyielding anger. But Achilles remained unmoved. "I will not fight for Agamemnon," he declared. "That man has no honor." The embassy returned empty-handed. Yet Achilles wasn't completely without compassion. As Hector's forces pressed closer to the Greek camp's heart, he allowed his beloved friend Patroclus to borrow his distinctive armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle. "Wear my armor," Achilles told him. "The Trojans will think I've returned to the fight and perhaps lose heart. But listen carefully. Push them back from our ships, but don't advance further. Don't pursue them to Troy's walls. The gods favor Hector within sight of his city." Patroclus agreed, though his heart already raced with the prospect of glory. He donned Achilles' magnificent armor, the gleaming breastplate, greaves with silver ankle clasps, ornate shield, and most distinctive, the helmet with its horsehair crest visible across the battlefield. His appearance had exactly the effect Achilles predicted. Seeing what they thought was the dreaded Achilles returning to battle, many Trojan warriors broke ranks and fled. Patroclus led the Myrmidons in a ferocious counterattack, pushing the Trojans back from the burning ships. But in the heat of combat, flushed with success and the unfamiliar sensation of being feared like Achilles, Patroclus forgot his promise. Instead of withdrawing once the ships were safe, he pressed forward, pursuing the retreating Trojans toward their city. 3 times Patroclus charged Troy's walls, and 3 times Apollo himself pushed him back. "Return, Patroclus," the god warned. "It is not your destiny to take this city." But caught up in battle frenzy, Patroclus ignored the divine warning. As he fought near the walls, the god struck him from behind, stunning him and knocking the helmet from his head. In that vulnerable moment, a Trojan warrior named Euphorbus speared him in the back. Wounded and disoriented, Patroclus stumbled backward, directly into Hector's path. Troy's greatest champion didn't hesitate. His spear drove deep into Patroclus's unprotected belly. As the Greek warrior collapsed, Hector stood over him with grim triumph. "Did you think you were Achilles?" he asked. "Did you think wearing his armor would let you sack our city? Now you fall, and he won't come to save you." With his dying breath, Patroclus managed his own prophecy. "Enjoy your victory while you can, Hector. Death already stands behind you, waiting. Achilles will not rest until you lie as I do." When word reached Achilles that Patroclus had fallen, his grief knew no bounds. He threw himself on the ground, pouring dust over his head and tearing his hair. His anguished cries carried across the camp, chilling the blood of all who heard them. His mother, the sea nymph Thetis, rose from the waves in response to her son's pain. She found him beyond consolation, now consumed with a new kind of wrath, not the cold anger against Agamemnon, but white-hot fury directed at Hector and all of Troy. "I will return to battle," Achilles vowed. "I will neither eat nor drink until Patroclus is avenged and Hector lies dead by my hand." "My son," Thetis said, her voice breaking with foreknowledge of what was to come. "If you kill Hector, your own death will swiftly follow. This is the fate the fates have spun for you." "Then let it come," Achilles replied without hesitation. "What is life worth when I failed to protect the one I loved most? And I will not live with this shame. Since Hector now possessed Achilles' armor, Thetis journeyed to Olympus, to the forge of the divine craftsman Hephaestus. Moved by her plea, the lame god worked through the night at his magical forge. By dawn, he had created the most magnificent armor any mortal had ever worn, a shield depicting the entire cosmos, a breastplate that shone like the sun, indestructible bronze greaves, and a helmet crowned with a plume of pure gold. When Thetis delivered this divine panoply to her son, Achilles wasted no time. He called an assembly of the entire Greek army. Before the gathered host, he formally renounced his quarrel with Agamemnon. "The anger that divided us has cost too much," he declared. "While we squabbled like children, good men died. I return to battle now, not for you, Agamemnon, but for Patroclus, who deserved better than dying while I sulked in my tent wearing my armor." As Achilles prepared for battle, strapping on his new divine armor, his immortal horses, Xanthus and Balius, offspring of the west wind, spoke to him in human voice, a rare and ominous sign. "We will carry you swiftly today, mighty Achilles," Xanthus said, "but your death's hour approaches. It is not from any failure of ours that Patroclus fell, but from the will of the gods and the strength of men." "I know I'm doomed to die here, far from my homeland," Achilles grimly replied, "but I will not depart for the house of Hades before I send many Trojans ahead to announce my coming." When Achilles finally charged onto the battlefield in his gleaming new armor, the effect was terrorizing. Trojans who had confidently pursued the Greeks now turned and ran in panic. Many were cut down in flight. Others, desperate to escape, plunged into the Scamander River, where Achilles followed, slaughtering them in such numbers that the river god himself rose up in protest, nearly drowning the hero in his swirling waters. Only Hephaestus's intervention, sending fire to dry the river's fury, saved Achilles from this divine wrath. Freed from the river's clutches, he continued his rampage across the plain, driving surviving Trojans toward their city like frightened cattle. At Troy's gates, only one man remained outside as the massive doors swung shut behind the retreating army. Hector, Troy's champion, waited alone to face the approaching storm. His father, King Priam, and his mother Hecuba pleaded from the walls for him to come inside to fight another day. But Hector stood his ground. "I cannot hide behind walls while others die for me," he said. "I led my forces in their confidence. I cannot abandon them in their fear." As Achilles drew nearer, however, even Hector's courage faltered. The man approaching seemed more than human, his divine armor blazing in the sun, his face a mask of unstoppable fury. At the last moment, Hector's nerve broke, and he ran, not in the shame of cowardice, but in instinctive recognition that he faced something beyond mortal opposition. 3 times he circled Troy's walls with Achilles in pursuit. Hector in flight, Achilles hunting. The gods watched from above. Apollo, who had protected Hector many times before, finally withdrew at Zeus's command. Athena used a trick, appearing as Hector's brother Deiphobus and telling him she would stand with him. Emboldened by this false confidence, Hector finally turned to face his fate. The 2 warriors threw spears. Both missed or were deflected. When Hector called for his spear back, Deiphobus had vanished. He realized the gods had deceived him. Drawing his sword, Hector charged bravely, but Achilles, who knew every weakness of the armor Hector wore, because it had originally been his, struck precisely where the throat was exposed. As Hector fell dying, he pleaded for mercy. "By your parents' names, return my body for proper burial." Achilles refused. "No mercy, just as Patroclus received none," he declared, then tied Hector's body to his chariot and circled Troy's walls, forcing the grieving Trojan royal family to witness this final indignity. For days, Achilles dishonored Hector's body in his grief, dragging it behind his chariot each morning. But Apollo protected the corpse from decay. Finally, the gods intervened. Zeus sent Thetis to convince her son and encouraged King Priam to personally go for the ransom. One night, guided by Hermes, the elderly king entered the Greek camp alone, bringing enormous treasure. In Achilles' tent, Priam collapsed at the hero's feet. "Remember your father, Achilles, and have pity on me. I have done what no other man on earth has done. I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my son." These words touched Achilles' heart. For the first time since Patroclus' death, his rage softened. He returned Hector's body to Priam and agreed to a 12-day truce for proper funeral rites. The two men, enemies yet united in grief, ate together, a brief moment of humanity amid the endless slaughter. After the truce ended, fighting resumed. Achilles, seemingly invincible, continued to dominate the battlefield. But his mother's prophecy waited to be fulfilled. In a battle near Troy's gates, Paris, the same prince whose desire had started it all, shot an arrow guided by Apollo. The arrow struck Achilles in his heel, his only vulnerable spot where his mother had held him when she dipped him as an infant into the river Styx for invulnerability. Greece's greatest warrior fell, his death giving the Trojans brief hope. A fierce battle erupted over his body and divine armor, but ultimately Odysseus and Ajax carried him to safety. His funeral games lasted 10 days, as his comrades competed in athletic contests to honor him. After Achilles' death, the war continued, but the Greeks grew increasingly desperate. Despite 10 years of siege, Troy's walls stood unbreached. Finally, Odysseus proposed an ingenious plan. Use cunning, not brute force. The Greeks constructed a massive wooden horse, a marvel of technical workmanship. Elite warriors, Odysseus included, hid inside the horse's hollow belly. The rest of the Greek army burned their camp and pretended to retreat to the nearby island of Tenedos, leaving only the horse standing on the beach. When the Trojans emerged, they discovered the abandoned Greek camp and the mysterious wooden horse. Cassandra warned again, "Burn it, and it brings destruction." But as always, no one believed her. The priest Laocoon also protested, throwing his spear into the horse's side, but sea serpents emerged and killed him and his sons. A Greek spy named Sinon, deliberately left behind, convinced the Trojans that the horse was an offering to Athena and that bringing it inside their city would grant divine protection. Caught up in celebration, the Trojans breached their own walls to bring the horse inside, the same walls that had resisted Greek assault for a decade. All night, Troy celebrated its apparent victory. When the city lay asleep, exhausted from wine and revelry, at midnight, the warriors hidden inside the horse emerged. They opened the city gates, and the Greek army, which had secretly returned from Tenedos under cover of darkness, poured in. Fire swept through Troy's streets in an orgy of violence and destruction. King Priam was slaughtered at an altar. Hector's son Astyanax was thrown from the walls to prevent future revenge. Andromache, Hector's widow, was taken captive. Hecuba lost her entire family. Cassandra was violated by Ajax the Lesser in Athena's temple, a sacrilege for which the goddess later punished the entire Greek fleet. Only a few Trojans escaped. Prince Aeneas, who fled the burning city carrying his father on his shoulders, would eventually journey to Italy and play a role in Rome's founding. As Troy's flames lit the sky, the Greeks realized what they had truly won. A ruined city, traumatized captives, and a Pyrrhic victory. Helen, for whom this war had been fought, was reunited with Menelaus, though ancient sources disagree on whether it was reconciliation or renewed conflict. The return journey proved treacherous for the Greek leaders. Agamemnon was murdered upon reaching home by his wife Clytemnestra, still bitter about Iphigenia's sacrifice. Ajax drowned in Athena's wrath for his sacrilege. Odysseus's journey home would take 10 more years, filled with countless adventures. Only a few heroes returned peacefully to their kingdoms. The Trojan War secured its place in Greek mythology as the most important epic, a story about honor, pride, love, and fate's terrible cost. It reminds us that even the greatest heroes are mortal, that the gods' whims can be devastating, and that glory often comes at the price of unimaginable sacrifice. And so ends the tale of Troy, a war that began with a golden apple and ended with a wooden horse. For 10 long years, the greatest heroes of Greece and Troy clashed beneath towering walls, their deeds immortalized in Homer's verses. This wasn't just a war, it was the defining moment of the ancient world, a story that has echoed through 3,000 years of human history. The ruins of Troy still stand today on the Turkish coast, silent witnesses to a conflict that may have been both historical reality and mythological epic. Whether every detail is true matters less than what the story teaches us, that pride leads to downfall, that even divine favor cannot save us from our choices, and that the cost of glory is often measured in the tears of those left behind. The heroes are gone, the walls have crumbled, but the story remains, forever reminding us of what humanity is capable of, both magnificent and terrible. This is the legacy of Troy, a tale that will never die as long as there are those who seek to understand the human heart in conflict with itself.